what's going on? Welcome to the Podcast Accelerator, where I'm going to talk to you today about 3 lessons that I've learned from over 1,100 episodes just over the last 5 years. It's been an insane ride, and it's kind of, I guess, wrapping up my International Podcast Day celebrations 1 week on from that fantastic day hosted by Dave and Steve. This is the Podcast Accelerator, the thrice-weekly show from me, Mark Asquith, that British podcast guy and CEO and co-founder here at Rebel Base Media, where we make amazing podcast tech, including podcast websites. We make Productivity, the Podcast Success Academy, and we make Captivate.fm, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host, where we release updates to the hosting platform every single Tuesday, and where you can be sure of complete personal support and never feeling silly when you contact us. That's one thing that I think really sets us apart from many other podcast hosts, is that, do you know what? We treat you like humans, all right? So please go and check out Captivate.fm for your podcast hosting, analytics, and marketing needs at Captivate.fm. Now, like I said, I've produced over 1,100 podcast episodes, and there are 3 things that always kind of, on reflection, always keep cropping up in terms of lessons that I have to keep going back to when it comes to starting or building a new show. And I'm going to dig into that in a second. But of course, I just want to give a 10-second shout out to AWeber, the guys who helped me to connect with you, the wonderful listener, the constant listener. And AWeber helps me to send you emails. They help me to engage with you in conversation, something I'm going to be talking about in the next episode, actually. And they help me to build relationships with you that I wouldn't ordinarily be able to do on my own. So please, if you're not doing that for your listeners, go and check AWeber out for 90 days free at markasquith.com/AWeber. So like I said, I've produced over 1,100 podcast episodes over the last 5 years. And no matter what the show is, the topic or the outlet of the show, 3 lessons recur time and again. And those 3 lessons are patience, personal critique, and humility. 3 keys that I believe lead to podcasting longevity. It's very, very difficult to, especially in this day and age where everyone's recommending, like you see so many entrepreneurs selling podcast courses and training and so many different things. And it honestly, it kind of frustrates me a little bit, because you see these kind of online entrepreneurs and you see business people that create podcast courses and training as a way of generating revenue, of course, but who don't really necessarily live podcasting all that well. So they don't necessarily see some of the things that work. They pop a course online and then they don't update it for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and things get out of date. And what you tend to find is that the advice gets stale. And these 3 lessons come up time and again for me. This patience, this personal critique, and humility. There are so many podcasters that are learning from these online courses that are never being taught these things. They're never being taught that patience is an absolute vital part of podcasting, because they're purchasing these things from various people, online, or they're getting it from the mate who's been podcasting for a little bit of time and they do a bit of coaching with them. And they tend to think that podcasting is this quick overnight fix, that they can build a podcast business very, very quickly. They can monetize and generate revenue. And sadly, that's not the case. Yes, you can monetize quickly, but you ain't going to quit your day job. Honestly, you ain't. I'm sorry, that's difficult to hear, but you ain't going to quit your day job. And that is what that lesson of patience really, really, really kind of just underpins for me, is this idea that, you know what? Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 10, day 100, day 300, you have to show up every single time and do more of the same. You've got to test what's working. You've got to figure out what data matters. You've got to figure out what you're measuring and when, and actually how you cut that data up to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And it's not easy. So lesson number 1 is patience. This is a marathon, not a sprint. I've said it before, that a podcast is not a project. A podcast is a lifestyle. It's a commitment. A podcast is not a project. If you treat it like that, just like blogging, just like YouTube, you will fall by the wayside. All right. The second lesson is personal critique. And it ties in with the 3rd lesson, actually. Personal critique, I'm consistently changing things up, and I get feedback from my listeners. I tweak things up. I get feedback from other podcasters. Evo, he's the most pernickety podcaster on the planet, but he does wonderful work because of it. It's fantastic the way that he does things. He'll tell me things. He'll say, look, dude, think about doing this, and I'll try it, and some stuff sticks, some stuff doesn't. And you've got to listen. You've got to be that person who is able to sit back and critique themselves, because I'm not a good podcaster, but I enjoy it, and I don't mind sitting in front of a mic and attracting the people that are attracted to me. I'm all right with that. I'm all right if I don't attract everyone. I don't necessarily want to be a bazillion-dollar podcaster. That's not my goal. It's to help the podcasting industry. That's why I talk like I talk. So personal humility and sort of personal critique are very, very vital. They sort of go hand in hand, which is lesson number 3, which is that humility. Like, just because you've got a microphone and you can talk into it doesn't mean that you should talk into it, all right? Unless you have something to say, and unless you can be humble with it, unless you can take that personal critique on the chin and say to yourself, do you know what, Marco? Maybe you are not doing the best you can do for your audience. Maybe it is time to rethink things. Maybe it is time to just tweak things up a little bit and iterate. I think without those two hand-in-hand lessons, that personal critique and that humility, I think you can sometimes get a little bit over cocky. You know, I see it at podcast conferences all the time. Podcasters who are quote-unquote big, who don't mingle with other podcasters. You know, they'll go to private dinners, they'll go to private events, they'll go to private this, that, and the other, rather than just walking the floor and just being friends with people. It's insane. Like, we're podcasters. This is podcasting. Like, none of us won a bloody Oscar. You know what I mean? And it's insane. You have to stay humble. Walk the conference floors. Listen to what people are telling you. Ask listeners for their feedback and listen to other people around you who can look at this from a completely different angle, because we aren't always right. And more often than not, there is no right or wrong. It's just what you can potentially improve upon bit by bit, iteration by iteration. And that's why these 3 keys, patience, personal critique, and humility, are the 3 biggest lessons that I think we should all be employing every single day as podcasts. And if we don't, I think, well, podcasting is maybe probably a short-term thing for the people who don't listen and learn from those lessons. So listen, thank you so much for joining me here on episode 69 of the Podcast Accelerator. I'm back from my trip in San Francisco. I've been out to San Francisco, and if you've been following my Instagram, which I urge you to do, you'll see where we've been and what we've been up to. Please go and check that out at Mr. Asquith. It's been a very insightful and fun trip. And I also want you to just go and give Captivate.fm a whirl, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host, where we release brand new features every single Tuesday. We did one just this week, which we'll be launching tomorrow. And what I'd like to also do is just tell your friends that listen to podcast-related shows, or anyone that is into podcasting, if you think they can benefit from this show, please just tell them that it exists, all right? I'd really, really appreciate that. If you're on my email list, forward the email to a friend, all right? I appreciate that dearly. And until the next episode, thank you so much. Enjoy yourself, stay cool, and never forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.